What's up, everyone? I am Symone here in the Atlanta HBCU Game Day studios. I'm joined by Luke, who is broadcasting from Greensboro, North Carolina at A&T, right, Luke?
North Carolina A&T State University.
So we're in North Carolina, we're in Atlanta, and we are bringing you guys the first edition of the HBCU NFL Report for the 2022 season, Luke. We had a lot of action last week, a lot of guys making their debuts, a lot of veterans, making their name known. A lot went down last week.
It did. And it's always good to see when some of the guys, not only the drafted guys, but the list of undrafted guys having an opportunity, making some noise. You know, the way the NFL works these days is that particularly in these now 3 preseason games, those undrafted guys as well as the drafted guys really get out first and get an opportunity to make an impression on those coaches. And that's certainly what happened in the week 1 of preseason games.
So before we jump into your players of the week, we talked before, we got some name changes, and we have to let our listeners know some of the guys, you might have called these guys a certain name in college, but they're going by another name in the NFL, starting with Jacoby, who is now, we think, Kobe Durant, former South Carolina State University Bulldog, now LA Rams. So sometimes I see Kobe listed on the roster. Sometimes I see Jacoby. I don't know what's going on.
Yeah, we're going to have to talk to Jacoby about that. We've been calling him Jacoby all of his career at South Carolina State. But as I was going through the list of HBCU players in the NFL, I came upon Kobe Durant. And I was like, would they just leave out the DE? What was the deal? So I don't know what the story is with that. I don't know if it's his preference or if it's something maybe that the team has initiated. But he's just one. The other one was probably more of a shock as I'm looking through the Indianapolis coach roster, and I come to what I think is number 53, who I know as Darius Leonard, well-known, all-pro linebacker, highest paid linebacker in the league. At least he was at one point. And now he's listed as Shaquille Leonard. And you know a little bit more about that. I hadn't seen the story about how that came about.
You haven't seen the story, Luke. You tell it on yourself. Because I wrote an article about a month ago.
Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, you don't know the story. I wrote it like a month ago. Okay. So the story is Darius Leonard. So now I'm just realizing it's both of the South Carolina State guys that changed their names. So I don't know what's going on there. 2 former Bulldogs.
Javon Hargrave will be known only as Von Hargrave going for South Carolina State thing. Right.
So for those of y'all who are like Luke and haven't read my story that dropped a month ago, Darius, now Shaquille Leonard, his birth name is Darius, but growing up, his family and his friends always called him Shaquille. But when he started playing sports, they put him on the roster under his government name, Darius. And now he said, it's never too late to, finally go by the name I always wanted to go by. So now he is Shaquille, I guess, AKA Shaq Leonard now.
Mm-hmm. That's a good day. I can certainly understand that because you want to be known by the way you've been known most of your life. So even though I missed the story, I certainly get it that he now wants to be. So we got to get used to Shaquille Leonard. That's a good story that you wrote, and my bad for not having seen it before now.
Well, some people like to get their content written. Some people like it video. So that's why we're here, to bring y'all the best of both. But we have to get into the top performers, Lou. You dropped a list of players of the week from the first preseason game. Preseason game started last week. For your offensive player of the week, it is a guy from the SIAC. Lute, who is the offensive player of the week?
It's none other than Shemar Bridges, a 6'4", 208-pound wide receiver out of Fort Valley State and the SIAC. And I would say, based on these preseason games, there were some other folks that kind of shined this week. But his performance, getting a 14-yard touchdown, also had a very acrobatic 38-yard reception. He led them in receiving yards, 4 receptions for 62 yards. And, one of the big things that's been the knock on Lamar Jackson is that his receiving core is not very good and that they don't have a big receiver. So this kid is 6'4", 208, And an interesting thing, as you check the stats about his senior year at Fort Valley State, he only had 28 catches for like 250 yards, only one touchdown. But I think what has intrigued the NFL folks, the Ravens in particular, is his size at 6'4", 208. Everybody wants a big target, particularly in the red zone. And he showed this past week that he can be just that with two very good catches. I think it was 62 yards on 4 receptions.
So, like you said about Shemar Bridges is actually, like you said, he is now the tallest receiver on the Ravens roster at 6'4". And he said in a press conference, he told reporters that the Ravens were very aggressive trying to sign him as an undrafted free agent. So they liked what they saw, and it's already panning out. He was the highest rated wide receiver by Pro Football Focus on Thursday. So he showed out amongst many receivers. And like you said, Lamar Jackson has always been knocked for, well, he hasn't been knocked. The Ravens have been knocked for not having a good wide receiver core around Lamar Jackson. And we can see this guy now maybe being one of his receivers. The Ravens did lose Hollywood Brown this offseason, who was Lamar's favorite target. So he's got to find, a new favorite target. And, Rashad Bateman is the number one guy there now. But we can see our man from the SIAC, Shemar, making some noise with the Ravens this season.
Yeah, and that showing out the way that he did, catching a touchdown, having the confidence to throw to him in the end zone. It was a jump ball in the end zone where his height was a factor. It's going to be interesting to see over these next 2 games, how much play does he get? How much run does he get? How much are they going to incorporate him and really see him as a potential weapon for the Ravens that, of course, as you said, Lamar Jackson needs. So it's going to be very interesting, but he certainly made a great debut. Couldn't have done better, I don't think. Four receptions and 5 targets Shemar had in the game this past week.
He showed off the hands for sure. Mossing somebody in your NFL debut, I mean, it don't get better than that.
That's right.
So defensively, who's your defensive player of the week?
Yeah, well, number one, first of all, a lot of the veterans that have been around for a while, for example, like Shaquille Leonard, sat out this first week. Teron Armstead on offense, who's now switched from New Orleans to Miami, he sat out. Some of the veterans, even the other veterans on defense, like Javon Hargrave, he sat out. So the guys who got chances in this first week, as I said, are guys that don't get a lot of playing time. And one of them was Danny Johnson, the defensive back, cornerback out of Southern University. And Danny Johnson had 4 solo tackles for the Washington Commanders this week. He led them in tackles, was tied for the team lead in tackles. He got in on 22 plays, about 30% of their offensive snaps. So they're taking a good look at him. He's really made the team for the past couple of years, Symone, as a kick returner. And he didn't do a lot of that at Southern, but he's done well as a kick returner at Washington. I mean, he's made the team and stayed on the team for a couple of years. So he had 4 solo tackles. He kind of stood out this year. He came out with a reputation at Southern of being a great defender. He's much like Kobe Durant. He played safety when he was at Southern, but he's been switched to cornerback. He's got to be able to play. You got to be able to cover guys one-on-one, and he did a very good job this week. The fact that he's been on the team for a couple of years probably bodes well for him. They're trying to see if he can really get into the rotation to play more downs rather than just on special teams.
Yeah, like you said, I think that's the biggest thing for Danny Johnson. He's pretty much a roster lock. He's been with the Commanders for the last 4 seasons. He's coming into his 5th season, and he's been able to stay on an NFL roster in the same roster since he's entered the league. So that's huge. I think, like you said, the biggest thing for him is trying to get more on defense and not necessarily just on special teams. So, he can make that money and, break out defensively. So special teams, this is another name we've heard very often on here, very often, like a day one HBCU game day athlete, someone we've covered pretty much since day one. Who is your special teams player of the week?
Well, the special teams player this week goes to Trenton Cannon, one of our favorite guys out of Virginia State, a dynamic running back at Virginia State and in the CIAA. It reminds me a lot of the career of Maurice Hicks. Maurice Hicks was a as a running back out of North Carolina A&T that just shattered all of the A&T rushing records before Tariq Cohen got there. When he got to the NFL, could only get in on special teams, couldn't really get a job as a every down, every play kind of player. Even as a third down back, he couldn't get on the field. And that's what Trent Cannon has done. But this is now in his fifth season in. He's bounced around. I think this is his fourth team, Nicole. I mean, Symone, excuse me.
Come on, Luke. You just
I'm
disrespected
sorry.
me. This is
Just
second disrespect
I
I've got.
just I just left a meeting with Nicole. But anyway, Symone, excuse me. But
Yes, this is his
Trenton
fourth
Cannon's on his
team in
fourth
5 seasons.
and everywhere he's been, the number of snaps he gets in the regular offense is really low. And he was really probably one of the most dynamic running backs, even on the level of a Tariq Cohen during his time at Virginia State. It looks like, and he only got into a couple of offensive snaps even in that first preseason game. I think it was 3 plays on offense. He had one run for a -4 loss. They pitched out to him. He got caught in the backfield. But he did have 2 kick returns, one of them of 26 yards, one of 24 yards. You know, if we covered him last year, he had a big 89, 90-yard kickoff return. So he's made the teams based on being a special teams player, much like Danny Johnson, and a kick returner primarily. I don't see any indication. Obviously, he's now at Tennessee, and Tennessee has a every down back who is, one of the best backs in the league. So, he has an opportunity if some people get hurt, that maybe he'll get in on some plays. But like I said, he reminds me a lot of the career of Maurice Hicks. Dynamic on the HBCU level, had to play special teams almost his whole NFL career.
Trenton Cannon definitely has had a very eventful NFL career. But one thing about Trenton Cannon, he's going to find himself on a roster, even if it is not the Tennessee Titans, because the Tennessee Titans special teams coordinator did say last week that Trenton was in a position battle for the kick return role. So it's not solidified that he will, make that 53-man roster with the Titans. But as we've seen, somebody is going to sign Trenton Cannon to their roster. So it's just a matter of which team he ends up sticking with this season. It possibly could be the Tennessee Titans. Every season, it seems like he has that one game where he has a really big play, and I think that's what keeps his stock rising on the NFL level, and people see the value in him on special teams. So we're definitely going to keep our eye on him. But, guys, we have to keep our eye on 4 special players this season. We had 4 HBCU players drafted into the NFL this season. We have to keep our eyes on these guys. They just made their preseason debut last week. So let's see what they all did. Lute, let's start with our guy up in the Windy City.
Yeah, Jatiah Carter out of Southern University, one of 2 HBCU offensive tackles, offensive linemen on the Bears roster. He did get in for 29 offensive snaps, almost half of their snaps on offense when the Bears knocked off Kansas City 19-14. The Bears rushed for 137 yards and passed for 173. I didn't get a chance to watch exactly how he did individually, but he did play half of those snaps. The Bears apparently played pretty well. And the fact that they would leave him in for almost half of the offensive snaps means they're trying to get a good look at him. He was the highest rated offensive lineman coming out in this year's draft. The Bears plucked him, I think it was in the 7th round. He was the last of the 4 to go off the charts. So they do also have the kid Lachavious Simmons out of Tennessee State that's also on their roster. He didn't get in as many snaps. He only got in on 20 snaps in their 19-14 win. So he made the squad last year. He's the guy, the infamous guy of a couple of years ago, was the only HBCU guy to be drafted coming out. So having 2 of them right now, the Bears, along with Joe Thomas, former South Carolina State great 2-time MEAC Defensive Player of the Year, the Bears really have more HBCU guys on their roster right now than anybody in the league.
Oh,
so
wow.
We'll have to see how that plays out, if they'll keep both of them. Carter is a guy, Roquan Smith is holding in, as they call it now, for Chicago, looking for a big contract. He's their primary linebacker. Joe Thomas This is probably his fourth team in the league. And actually, Joe Thomas has been in the league now. Let's see, Joe's at least been in the league 7 to 8 years, 8 years out of South Carolina State, and he's of that great defensive history from South Carolina State. The Javon Hargraves, the Shaquille Leonard, now Jacoby Durant. You go back to some of their other greats that came out of South Carolina State. So Joe Thomas has stood around for 8 years in the league. He's on to Chicago, but we'll keep an eye on Carter to see if Carter and Symone to see if they make eventually.
So let's talk about Kobe Durant. You brought up Kobe Durant. He has been going crazy for the LA Rams during their training camp and during their OTA period. I feel like on Twitter every day it was a highlight from Kobe Durant. He's picked off Matthew Stafford, their starting quarterback, at practice, and he's just been doing really, 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 really well so far. So he started in the preseason game for the LA Rams. He only had one tackle, but he wasn't really in the game that much, which is honestly a good sign because, like I said, he's been showing out a lot at practice. They didn't really need to see that much from him in the week one preseason game. So we'll continue to monitor him at practice. But like I said, the stock has been soaring for Kobe Durant. And for him to start in that preseason game and make a big play, he had a big tackle. I believe he tackled a running back. He came all the way up. I think two defenders had missed tackles on the running back, and he was the one to come in and stop the run. So he had a really big play there, and the Rams said, we like what we saw. You can come on out, stay healthy, get ready, for the season. So that's big for Kobe Durant.
It was a big thing with the Kobe Durant or Kobe Durant, whichever one you prefer. He was the captain, the quarterback, and the secondary for South Carolina State. Made a big play on Shedeur Sanders, a big safety blitz sack on Shedeur Sanders in the Celebration Bowl. Always been a heady player. Last year's MEAC Defensive Player of the Year. Another one of the guys from South Carolina State. If you ever talk to Buddy Pugh, he will tell you we grow him different in South Carolina, and he's had a slew of them that have come through that Bulldog program. And the Kobe Durant is another one. If you had seen him, a lot of people thought he might have been a little too small, but what he makes up and what he lacks perhaps in size, he makes up in smarts. Very smart player, very heady player. And I think that's what the Rams liked. That's what they saw. And then he tested well at the combine. So he's playing in an experienced secondary. I think the Jalen Ramsey's and others have taken him under his wing. So I think he'll stick. I think he'll be a key contributor for them. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get on the field quite a bit this year for the LA Rams.
I definitely see that, especially like you said, not only is he learning from one of the best defensive backs in the league right now in Jalen Ramsey, but he's also in practice going up against who some people believe is one of the best wide receivers in the league in Cooper Kupp. Definitely a really great wide receiver in Cooper Kupp. So he's going up against the best, and he's learning from the best every day at camp. So that is invaluable for him. So let's pivot and look in Detroit. We have a former Tiger in Detroit, now with the Lions.
Yes, you're talking about James Houston, the guy who finished second last year, I think, in the FCS in sacks to Isaiah Land. He was the disruptor for Jackson State last year, transferring over from Florida. And, I love the quote that he had last year when he said he had seen nothing like the crowds at Jackson State. He was just overwhelmed with how great the crowds were at Jackson State. And he did what Deion Sanders wanted him to do, which was play well enough to get the attention of the NFL scouts. Went off to Detroit in the fourth round. I think he's also in a good situation up in Detroit. But I think this is the thing I think, Symone, with any HBCU players that come out. One guy I think about is Daryl Johnson, who's started with Buffalo. He's now with the Carolina Panthers. There is no shortage of great athletes and performers in the NFL camps. You're going to really have to fight and really going to have to stand out. And I've understood, and I've seen some of your reports saying that he's been performing very well in camp. They like him. And when the coaches and the defensive coordinators, position coaches are talking about you, that's always a good thing. If you mentioned after practice or after a game and whatnot. He didn't get in for a lot of snaps this week. He only got in for 17 defensive snaps. But I think it's like you said with Jacoby Durant. They already know they want to keep him. They just want to find out what role is he going to play. Is he going to be a every down kind of player? Is he going to be a sub package guy? Or will he just play on special teams? He has the kind of speed and the kind of body that he could play special teams as well. And that's always a consideration when young guys are coming into teams.
Their head coach said last week, Dan Campbell, speaking on James Houston, was saying how he's so excited to have him in the room and how they're just really lucky to have him in their room and on their team. So I think that's huge. Like you said, you have the coach speaking about you. If the media is asking about you after practice, that's usually, not always, but usually a good sign. In James' case, it has definitely been a good sign, and he's definitely been someone who's continued to stand out at practice. And like you said, I think they're still trying to figure out where they want him to play. He was an outside linebacker and pass rusher at Jackson State. He was versatile there, and they still want to use him versatilely with the Lions. They just don't know, I think, if they want him to be a down lineman, more playing, like you said, outside linebacker. So I still think they definitely said that they're still trying to figure out exactly how he fits into the defense, but he will be a contributor on defense.
I think the thing I saw is that they like him as a rush in. They like the fact the way what he showed for last year at Jackson State, but of course he's in the shadow of Aiden Hutchinson, who was their first round pick, number 2 pick in the draft. But obviously, like you said, they like him, and they just got to figure out exactly how they want to use him.
So moving on, last but certainly not least, Joshua Williams, former Fayetteville State University Bronco turned Kansas City Chief. And Joshua Williams was actually the first HBCU player taken off the board, and he became the first HBCU player drafted since 2020, who was, like you mentioned earlier, Lachavious Simmons out of Tennessee State University. Joshua Williams has been playing really well with the Kansas City Chiefs. He started at cornerback in their first preseason game. He got in 56% of the defensive snaps. He had a defensive tackle, and he also had a tackle on special teams, so he was able to get in there and have an impact.
Yeah, and I guess they're going to play him, and you may know a little more. They're going to play him more at corner than at safety.
So, yeah,
but he
started at cornerback in that game.
Okay.
So if that's any indication, then.
Right. And they obviously are trying to get a good look at him, as they say, in stadiums, how he's going to perform in stadiums. The fact that he played more than half of their defensive snaps, they're trying to throw him into the fire, so to speak, and see how he performs. 1 tackle and 1 assist obviously is not anything that would pop, so to speak. He didn't get a consideration for the player of the week on defense, but the fact that he played 56 snaps lets you know that they really are trying to find out what he can bring to the table. Is he ready for the fire, the real fire of NFL action? So we'll keep an eye on it. We'll, I have done this. This is the first time really, Symone, that I have done this in the preseason. I usually waited for the first part of the season, but because we have 34, I think it is now, HBCU guys in camps with chances. We're going to talk about another kid that had a good, undrafted kid that had a good day, Dalen Baldwin, who spent time at both Morgan State and Jackson State before finishing his career at Michigan last year. He had a good day also. So it's always going to be, we have a lot to keep an eye on in terms of 34 guys on rosters in the preseason. There were only 22, 23 that made rosters last year, made the opening day rosters. So we're going to see as we watch the cut wires that coming down on each Tuesday over the next couple of weeks to see as they try to get down to 53.
Let's go ahead and talk about Baldwin. He was your runner-up for Offensive Player of the Week. What did he do that, like you said it was close between him and Shemar. So
Right.
What did he do that stood out to you?
Well, primarily what he did, he had multiple catches. He and Shemar were the only ones who had multiple catches. And, whether it's a guy like Shemar or a guy like Dalen Dalen had 3 receptions and 3 targets. It means he caught every pass that was thrown to him. And for the Cleveland Browns in their game against, who did they play? They played Jacksonville. He had 3 receptions. And, you know, we're coming off a time, if you look at a kid like Kadero Hodge, who is still in the league. Kadero is now, this year, he's at the Arizona. Oh, no, I'm sorry, he's in Atlanta. They're always looking for guys who can come in off the bench and make plays. That's one of the things that I think bodes well for Shemar, as well as bodes well for Dalen. Dalen was a late signee. He was not one of the guys who was signed right after the draft. He was only signed maybe a week before they went into camp. And again, he has good size, has good speed. He had a good year at Jackson State. Surprisingly, he was one of the people who left after his first year under Deion Sanders. When everybody else was coming in, he was one of the guys that left. Went up to Michigan. I guess he thought he would play on a bigger stage, but as it turned out, he probably would have had a bigger stage had he stayed at Jackson State. But Jackson State did have a plethora of good receivers. He went up to Michigan and showed that he could compete in the Big Ten, and now he's getting a chance. And keep your eye on him. He's number 17 for the Cleveland Browns. Obviously a good debut, and we'll see how it goes as we go down over these next few weeks and the cut lines become apparent to us.
The cut lines are definitely coming. We had a cut today. So rosters were cut from 90 to 85. This was the first mandatory cut for this offseason. I'm pretty sure all of our players, everyone we talked about was definitely safe, but I didn't see any other HBCU players that caught my eye on the cut list. So that's good to know. There will be 2 more roster cuts after each preseason game. So next week, the teams are required to cut their rosters from 85 to 80. And then the following week, it goes from 80 to 53. So that last big chop. And that's why we wanted to bring you guys the preseason edition of the HBCU NFL Report, because now is the time to, follow these guys on their journey to the 53-man roster.
Absolutely. And yeah, that's something we're going to keep our eye on. But it's good that no one got off the list this week. That means that they took a good look at them. And on first look, they didn't get rid of anybody. So it's a good sign. We'll see how far it goes. Like you said, that big cut is going to be the big one when, they're going to slash 20 plus players from their rosters. And then what will happen is they'll also sign, I think they can sign up to 12, on the practice squad. We'll see. If they do that, they will keep getting checks in the league, and we'll have to try to see how many of them make it down as we head towards 53.
Well, you guys have to stay locked in here on HBCU Game Day and the HBCU NFL Report with Symone and Lute. Today, broadcasting from the Atlanta HBCU Game Day studios, and Lute is broadcasting from NCA&T.
Enjoyed it, Symone. Look forward to it again next week.
Thank you guys so much for joining us this week.